We are going to be live in a second. Hey, good evening, everybody. Seems like I haven't seen you. It is time to start almost. Yeah, we're actually. Yeah, but some of you haven't seen in a while. We haven't seen the Wassermans in a while. And
we just missed 1 week.
Hi. Hi.
We're eating dinner.
I'm here.
It feels like a longer.
I know it does.
How's the peacock doing?
I guess okay. I don't know. There's a rumor of massive layoffs at work, so I'm kind of holding my breath a little bit.
Oh no.
Yeah. But anyway, I think it's okay. They're a little late to the game.
I think people in Hollywood aren't even sure what the heck's going to happen, right?
Well, my cousin is an editor for some show, Young Sheldon, and they're saying that he'll be back to work at the end of September.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, some productions have definitely started up, so
Yeah.
that is good news.
That's really good news.
And my nephew, he builds sets, and I think he's going back to work sometime next month.
But you see, NBC, we had to postpone the Olympics. That was a huge revenue stream we had to postpone.
Yeah.
We also, our theme parks are definitely challenged right now, so that's another revenue stream. So there's a lot going on with the company.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what happens when your company owns everything. Right?
Can you imagine how much Disney's losing?
Crazy. Crazy. Again, I mean, these companies are so big and they have so many, their assets are so enormous. Yeah, it's, yeah, everything's going to be owned by Amazon by the time this is all over. Amazon's the last company standing. All Amazon.
Yep.
Aren't they saying that this is why are they blaming Bill Gates? They should be blaming Jeff Bezos. He's the only one getting rich off of this. Well, he was getting rich before.
He's the richest man in the world.
The richest man, and soon he's going to be the richest man by several times over.
Well, they say he's going to hit $1 trillion next year.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, we have people that are joining us by Facebook right now, which is good. We like people on Facebook, but we'd love for them to be able to be with us in person too. And join.
Well, I did watch you guys on Facebook last week, and I loved how you guys ended talking about the Dodgers and stuff. That was so fun to listen to you guys.
Yeah, well, it was fun to watch the Dodgers last night. That was a fun game.
Yeah, they're playing. Actually, they start in a few minutes here.
I have it on in the background.
Oh.
See, now we actually have we have something else that we can do now. So I'm glad everybody's there. But look, that's part of what's fun about doing things is that you have something else that you could be doing for the last few months. We haven't had a lot of options. So it's nice to be able to have options. Seriously, I mean, it's a weird thing, but just the ability to have an option of something to do is kind of cool. It makes us feel a little bit more alive, if you will, opportunities, but I mean, again, that's kind of what has been cool about doing these classes every night, not missing a class, is that we know that there's at least something that you can do. And if you can't do this, then you're doing something else, which hopefully is also going to be a meaningful thing. But how can you be doing anything more meaningful than studying Torah? And actually, in all fairness, tonight is actually a Jewish holiday too. It's Tisha B'Av. So in a little bit, there's Joyce. Hey, Joyce.
Hi, how are you?
Good. You look radiant.
Thank you. I'm feeling radiant.
Sparkly.
Thank you.
I will tell
Happy
you.
to be here. This is what I wanted to be doing.
Thank you, Joyce, and you're keeping us all happy. The Tisha B'Av is tonight, and I actually, in a few minutes, there's going to be a message that I'm posting up for the holiday on Facebook. There'll be a message, and it's a tough one. It's a tough holiday because there's no celebration to it. There's nothing, sometimes we have a holiday and there's a, it's Yom Kippur, we fast, but there's a hope that there's going to be forgiveness. Tisha B'Av is about loss and destruction, and really just thinking about loss. It's basically a national day of mourning, and so there really isn't anything, and it's like the initial mourning every year, where we just think about what we lost. And a lot of Jews don't celebrate Tisha B'Av, which is what my little speech is about. The fact that unfortunately a lot of people don't even know what it is. And the 9th of Av was the day that the temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, and then the same day the temple was destroyed by the Romans, about 650 years later. And so when we think about a day of destruction, that both of them happened the same day, and then there was dark days in the Crusades. It also happens to be the day that the Jews were expelled from Spain. Not coincidentally, also the day that Columbus set forth or the next day, he left on the day after Tisha B'Av from Spain. So these days are commemorating loss and death and destruction. And so there's nothing really happy about this. There's not really a silver lining to it, other than the fact that we survived and we're here and we're still alive. But today we just think, starting tonight, we just think about what we lost. It is traditionally a fast day, but of course, for people who are at risk, and anybody who's over 60 technically is in a risk category, you're not supposed to fast this Tisha B'Av according to the sages, the rulings on this. You're not supposed to fast during a pandemic. So I'm assuming that there's going to be a lot of people that are also given a waiver on Yom Kippur coming up in a few months, about 2 months. 7 weeks or so. My guess is that some people are not going to want to. They're not going to want to give up fasting, but again, if people are at any kind of health risk at all, they're not supposed to fast, because it is stress on your body, and we're not supposed to put any stress on our bodies right now, according to Jewish tradition. So, that being said, I'm not in that risk category, so I do have to fast tomorrow starting tonight. And so I had a little bit of food a little early because I guess the fast doesn't really start for about another 40 minutes or so. So I had a little food, and it's tough not to drink. That's the hardest during the summer, is not drinking for Tisha B'Av. But as I've maintained, if you don't weep and if you don't mourn on Tisha B'Av, you can't really understand how much joy and how much celebration there is in Israel when you don't realize how much we lost and how much we dreamt and strove and just had nothing for 2,000 years. And so for us to understand that's what Tisha B'Av is, then we can really celebrate and be happy for what we have with Israel today, and we can really celebrate. So we have to be sad. We actually have to put ourselves into that to realize what we do have, which is this miracle of modern day Israel. So that being said, we are dedicating our studies to Tisha B'Av and to the fact that we have not forgotten these losses that some of them go back 2,600 years. And the book of Lamentations in the Bible tells the story. It's a 5-chapter book. If you want to read it tonight, that is one of the things you're supposed to do for Tisha B'Av, is read Lamentations, according to tradition written by the prophet Jeremiah. And again, it's not a very big book. It's 5 chapters. It's probably about 100 and something lines, 100 verses. And it is definitely a sad and tragic and very, very dramatic and very powerfully upsetting book. which tells about how difficult life was for the Jews when the Babylonians destroyed the temple, laid waste to our holy city. Interesting midrash, by the way, an interesting legend, which is that it's actually connected to this week's Torah portion. So we'll get into this week's Torah portion, and then I'll share you a connection to Tisha B'Av. You'll have a chance to think about that. And we're going to begin with Vaetchanan, which is the words, and I beseeched, I begged. This is Moses' words. These are Moses' words to the people. Again, the whole book of Deuteronomy is Moses saying goodbye and sharing his reflections on what had happened up until that time. And so what we just read at the end of the first portion, Deuteronomy, is that God tells Moses that he's not going to cross into the land. These are all where we got to at the end of the first chapter, the first section, the first portion, was that we actually read the end of the book of Numbers, where Israelites basically get to where they are. They beat the Amorite king Sihon and Og. They come to the Jordan River, and God tells Moses, again, you're not crossing in. Make Joshua the next person. And again, the Gadites, the Reubenites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh are told, you have to come into the land of Israel, then you can go back and resettle on the other side of the Jordan River. This is all what we read about. And Joshua is essentially given, the charge that he's taking over. And so the portion begins, Vaetchanan, which is actually the first word of the portion. That doesn't happen a lot, where the Hebrew name of the portion is actually the first word. And it kind of almost begins mid-stride, which is, I pleaded with the Lord at that time, saying, O Lord God, you who let your servant see the first works of your greatness and your mighty hand, you whose powerful deeds no God in heaven or on earth can equal, let me, I pray, cross over and see the good land on the other side of the Jordan, that good hill country and the Lebanon. So Moses, Vaetchanan, pleads and beseeches for himself. This is what the portion begins with. That scene where Moses begs. And in this version in Deuteronomy, it's a lot more explicit, which I guess makes sense because this is Moses' version of it. And here Moses begs and pleads with God to say, please, God, let me cross over. And there's an interesting midrash here, an explanation that the word Vaetchanan, if you look at the word Vaetchanan in Hebrew, if you add up the numbers, the letters, the numerical equivalent, right, the numerology of it, it adds up to 515. And according to tradition, Moses had 515 prayers to God, begging God to let him in. 515 prayers. God, please let me in. Please. And God doesn't change his mind. God says, no, I can't. You can't come in. The Midrash continues in a very strange way, which is this, and it's connected to Tisha B'Av, to this holiday. And here's the Midrash. God told Moses, I can't let you in. Not because of the incident of the rock, where you struck the rock, which is what the Torah tells us. And Moses, interestingly, here doesn't dwell on that too much, about his mistake. He really dwells on this pleading with God. It's that God says to Moses, if I let you into the land, you will build the temple. You will build the temple because you're so holy and you are powerful enough in holiness to build the temple yourself. Not 200 years later by King David, but you will build the temple. And the problem is, Moses, that if you build the temple, it'll never be destroyed. Because if you build it, it's going to be so holy that the temple can't ever be destroyed by human hands. Because anything you do, Moses, is eternal with my help. But you can't build the temple. Somebody else will have to build it. And here's the reason. If the temple doesn't get destroyed, the people will be destroyed. Moses, it's either going to be the people or the temple. Which is it going to be? And Moses says, let me die 100 times, but don't let the people die. I didn't realize that that's the trade-off, either me or the people. Because he says, look, if you build a temple, these people, the temple will be eternal, and you can't have that. The temple has to be destroyed so that the people won't be destroyed. That is the punishment. The punishment will be the temple's destruction. Temple's destruction or the people's destruction, you pick. And he picks his own destruction and the temple's destruction, so that Moses becomes equated with the temple itself, and that was the trade-off. It's a very powerful midrash because it explains that the loss of the building, that the loss of Jerusalem, the loss of Jewish sovereignty was horrible, but the loss of life is worse. And if we had to choose between one or the other, we have to protect human life. It's a very powerful understanding, and it's one that kind of informs Jewish tradition to this moment. Because when we talk about why is that Temple Mount still have a mosque on it, it's because Jews have said for the last 53 years, going to war over that mountain, that Temple Mount isn't worth it. The building is not worth the loss of life that will ensue because of it. And so Judaism's been informed by this kind of understanding that it's not about buildings, even the holiest building. Nothing's more important than a human life. It's a very interesting midrash. So Francine wants to know, why was it one or the other? I will tell you, we have to assume that it's this kind of understanding. It's more of an explanation for why things had to be the way they were. And it kind of goes back to like the Garden of Eden. Why is it immortality versus free will? Why is it the tree of knowledge versus the tree of life? The best we can say is that this is the reality we live in. And the reality we live in is that that for us, the way we interpret our own history is that we lose things, but the things that we don't want to lose, we'll do anything to preserve. And that is human life. That is our family, our friends, our community. Those things we're not going to equivocate on. Really kind of more informs what our values are, rather than, this kind of false theoretical setup with the temple or the people. But this idea that somehow the temple, the destruction of God's temple or the destruction of God's people, let it be the destruction of the temple. It's kind of an interesting kind of like, it's a setup. We know it's a setup, but look at what the setup teaches us. So Moses pleads with God and begs him over and over again. And there are more and more midrashim about the way Moses begged. We read about them a couple years ago, actually. It's been a long time that we read them. But one of the really powerful ones is Moses says, let me go in incognito. No one has to know that I'm going in. I'll go in and I'll dress as a peasant. No one will know it's me, Moses. Just let me go in. God says, I can't let you go in. You can't go in. Moses says, let me go in like a bug. Let me just walk in turn me in an animal, and I'll walk in like an animal on my belly. And God says, you can't go in. You can't go in. It is a really powerful message about, again, we know Moses can't go in, and we don't ignore the seemingly, the injustice in that, or the difficult reality that is that Moses couldn't go in. But we take away lessons from it, and we add to the lessons about why Moses couldn't go in. And it's been something we the rabbis discussed it thousands of years ago. We still discuss it every time we read that powerful line where Moses is told he can't go in. And that's the way this portion begins, with Moses, you can't go in. The Lord was wrathful on my account and would not listen to me. The Lord said to me, enough, never speak to me of this matter again. Go up to the summit of Pisgah and gaze about to the west, to the north, to the south and the east. Look at it well, for you shall not cross yonder Jordan. Give Joshua his instructions and imbue him with strength and courage, for he shall go across at the head of the people. And he shall allot to them the land that you may only see. You'll see it. I'm going to give you a vision of it, but you're not going to step foot in it. Meanwhile, we stayed on in the valley of Beth Peor. And that is Moses pretty much establishing, and again, in these last few verses of chapter 3, the beginning, though, of the portion, where the portion began, that this was a critical moment in his life. And it's the way the portion begins. So then we get into chapter 4. Now, we talked about Deuteronomy and what makes the book unique. And again, the theory that it was written separately, maybe a long time afterwards. What happens now is Deuteronomy gets into a recounting of the 10 Commandments, and it seems to be, again, it's a little different. It's slightly different. I don't want to dwell on the differences between Deuteronomy and chapter 20. But there's a different tone to the narrative too, before and after. And look at the context of the way the 10 Commandments are given versus the way they are in the narrative in Exodus. And here, we've already kind of like gotten to the point where Moses has told people how we got to where we are now. But now he skips back to Exodus. We were recounting numbers, and now he's gone back to Exodus to talk about the 10 Commandments. And look at what it sounds like. Okay? So he says, and now Israel, which again, this phrase, Va'ata Yisrael, now is the word ata. It's now, in this moment. But it also is connected to the next word, Shema. Hear, Shema el hachukim. Give heed to the laws is the way it translates. This word Shema is throughout the book of Deuteronomy, the word to hear, to listen. And this is now Moses telling the next generation, Shema, listen. And we will read the Shema tonight. We're going to read the 10 Commandments tonight and the Shema in the same Torah portion, chapters 4 through 6 tonight. So let's look at it. Give heed to the laws that I'm instructing you to observe, so that you may live to enter and occupy the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you. And here it says, you shall not add anything to what I command you or take anything away from it, but keep the commandments of the Lord your God that I enjoin upon you. So you're not supposed to add to it. You're not supposed to take away from it, which is interesting because we can make the argument that Jews did add to the laws. But we don't believe that we added to the Torah. We believe that the laws that we added in the Talmud and later on are laws that only serve to protect the mitzvot that are in the Torah itself. So when we talk about 613 commandments, those are the commandments in the Torah. And then, of course, there are many other commandments that are attached to that, thousands of commandments that are attached to that, but they all are based on those 613 commandments. We have no commandments in Judaism that don't go back to those original commandments in the Torah. We can't, because then it would be, we can't add mitzvot. We don't say, oh, you know what, we have a new commandment that we're going to add. We can't. It's got to be based on the commandments that already existed. And so here's the reason. The Torah tells us in the Torah itself, don't add to the commandments. Don't add. Don't subtract, but don't add. And that's why when we talk about why is it so important for people to keep the commandments, it's because of that reason too. We can't take them away and say, you know what, these aren't relevant anymore. These aren't part of who we are anymore. So this is tough because do Do we understand ourselves as adding or taking away from the commandments in our own day? I will tell you that this has been an issue for Judaism for a long time. 2,000 years at least, folks. And you know how we know this? Because there's a line in the Christian Bible, actually, in the book of Matthew, chapter 5, right around the area where it talks about the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus is speaking to the Jewish people in the Galilee, in Israel, in Judea, he says to them, "Verily I say unto you, I have come here to change not a jot nor a tittle," is the King James translation, "in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled." That I am not here to change the law. And he says specifically, I'm here not to change the law, because he knew that the Torah says you can't change the law. Now, the weird thing is that the translation, "not a jot or a tittle," is a weird King James, Elizabethan English type word. But what it really means is I'm here not to change a yud, which is the smallest letter, which is why it's iota in Greek. I'm not here to change the yud or even a dot on the yud. That's what Jesus had said. I'm here not to change the dot the smallest letter or even the dot on the smallest letter. That's what he told his followers. Now, of course, that's not the case. That's not what happened, though some of his followers understood Christianity differently, and Jesus differently, which is that they thought that once he said, "till all be fulfilled," that when he came, he fulfilled the laws. So now we don't have to follow the laws because he fulfilled the laws. That was the 1,000 years exception. That's the out that they had. Because when Jesus in his own lifetime said, "I'm not here to change the law," he knew that as a Jewish teacher, as a rabbi, as a Jew, he could not come and say, "I'm here to redo the law or change anything." And so he says, "I'm not here to change anything." So again, there was obviously a big break within Christianity not long after him. But originally, there was a big discussion within the early Christian church whether they could change any of the mitzvot. And it comes from this law, this phrase in the Torah, which is you are not allowed to change it. And it's pretty clear. There's no exceptions made. But again, that one line that Jesus said, "until all is fulfilled," that kind of allowed people to say, well, maybe you're the fulfillment. Anyways, interestingly, the Seventh-day Adventists believed that Jesus did fulfill the law except the Ten Commandments, that the Ten Commandments were not ever going to be changed. And so that's why they follow the Sabbath as the seventh day, because that is in the Ten Commandments. And they said, we have to follow that because Jesus didn't replace the Ten Commandments. The rest of the 606 commandments, or 603 commandments, those are gone, but the 10 still stayed. So that's why Seventh-day Adventists believe that those commandments didn't get fulfilled, if you will. So he says, Moses says, "You saw with your own eyes what Lord did in the matter of Baal Peor, that the Lord your God wiped out from among you every person who followed Baal Peor," which is the god that they worshipped in this place that we read about in Numbers. So this is, again, a flashback to just a few weeks ago.
Hey, Rabbi?
Yeah.
Just real quick, this is Philip.
Yeah.
Back in 1988, you were talking about the commandments, 613 commandments. Back in 1988, when I worked for NBC News, I was assigned to cover Pat Robertson, Reverend Robertson, when he was running for the Republican nomination for president. And I asked Reverend Robertson once, I said, well, as a Jew, do I get to go to heaven, or is that just for Christians? And he said that I could only go to heaven as a Jew if I obeyed all 613 commandments. Yeah. And I looked at him, I said, I guess I'm not going.
Well, listen, it's an interesting line because there are obviously Christians who believe that it doesn't matter with you. So he kind of followed it almost in between And he obviously, he'd kind of come to terms with this idea, which is that there are Jews who go to heaven, but only Jews who are keeping all the mitzvot, which again, even for a very religious, Orthodox, observant person, is virtually impossible, since many of the commandments deal with sacrifices, which we can't do anymore. But putting that aside, what he's basically saying is that because Jesus allowed people to fulfill the commandments without fulfilling the commandments, that there was this idea that, again, that Paul had first shared with the followers, and then later on Peter seems to come over to Paul's side, was that, yeah, through Jesus, you don't have to follow the laws anymore. The law is fulfilled through Jesus. So that's a really important, it's his interpretation, but it's at least allowed for Jews to go to heaven. But it basically said, look, if you really want to know the way to do it, if you follow Jesus, you don't have to follow the 613 commandments. So, he might have been, again, when you read between the lines of what he's saying, remember that is also what he's saying. But again, on the good side is he was saying, if you follow the commandments, then you are okay. So it's an interesting rationalization, or way he's come to terms with it. So the people who worshipped God, the god of Baal Peor, which was a pagan god, they also were part of an orgy. I mean, it literally says that in the book of Numbers, that they went into this. They went and followed after these cultic prostitutes, these Midianite women at Baal Peor, and it caused a plague, and there was death and destruction, and it was a horrible scene. But again, it's interesting to think about the fact that Jews at the time, they weren't competing with Christianity or Islam or monotheistic religions at the time. They, of course, are competing with pagan religions, including pagan religions that have orgies as part of their celebration. I don't know, it's tough when you give people a choice of eating unleavened bread at Passover or, having a drunken orgy. It's a tough sell. Now, of course, you got to see what the ethics are and what the people who are living their lives, obviously, there's a godly way to live your life, but it's a hard sell if you're selling religions, and in the market of religions, this was not probably an easy thing to rationalize with people when they were saying, hey, these people, are you telling me that that's the way they celebrate Hanukkah? Well, there's no Hanukkah yet, but you know what I mean. That's the holiday. It's again, in all seriousness, there were other things that came with that, including child sacrifice, murder of pretty much murder of anybody for any reason without any repercussions. Not knowing whether your stuff could get stolen from you just because you're on the wrong side of the boundary. All those kinds of things are, part and parcel of the whole worship and cultural environment that you're participating in. But when you look at the religious aspect of it, again, this was what people were doing. And so again, the people who survived were the people who didn't go over and who held fast to the Lord. They're all alive today. See, I've imparted to you laws and rules as the Lord my God has commanded me, for you to abide by in the land that you are about to enter and occupy. Observe them faithfully, for that will be proof of your wisdom and discernment to other peoples, who on hearing of all these laws will say, surely that great nation is a wise and discerning people, by the way, which is something you can also say might have been one of the things that Pat Robertson was alluding to. When you study the Bible and you realize what's going on in the Bible, you understand that you come away with this idea that, wow, this is the example of participating in a culture that celebrates wisdom and that celebrates discipline and responsible behavior. And I mean responsible behavior, and the idea that knowing that your behavior needs to be a testament to responsibility. So here's the here we go. For what great nation is there that has a God so close at hand as is the Lord our God whenever we call upon him? Or what great nation has laws and rules as perfect as all this teaching? And that's the word it uses, Kechol HaTorah, which is why it's capital T. That I set before you, This day, hayom, which is another word that went throughout the book of Deuteronomy, this day. But take utmost care and watch yourselves scrupulously so that you do not forget the things that you saw with your own eyes, and so they do not fade from your mind as long as you live, and make them known to your children and to your children's children. Another theme that we have throughout the book of Deuteronomy. Remember them, teach them to your children. As we say in the Shema and Vaetchanan, teach them diligently to your children. And here it goes even further. Teach them to your grandchildren, to the children of your children. So it actually is saying this multi-generational power of teaching and of teaching the next generations. It's incumbent not just on parents, but on grandparents. Interesting to see that. That the day that you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, which is Mount Sinai, when the Lord said to me, gather the people to me that I may let them hear my words in order that they may learn to revere me as long as they live on earth and may so teach their children. Again, you came forward and stood at the foot of the mountain. The mountain was ablaze with flames to the very skies, dark and densest clouds. And again, think about how this is similar and a little bit different than the book of Exodus. The Lord spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but perceived no shape, nothing but a voice. He declared to you the covenant that he commanded you to observe. And here it says specifically, Aseret HaDevarim, the 10 commandments, these 10 things, these 10 codes. And he inscribed them on 2 tablets of stone. At the same time, the Lord commanded me to impart to you laws and rules for you to observe in the land you are about to cross into and occupy. So there it says specifically that God also gave me other laws and rules, not just the tablets of stone, the covenant, if you will, which is why we call it a covenant, but also laws and rules. Hukim mishpatim. The words for laws, translated as chok, is a rule, a law, and then rule is mishpatim, or statutes. So these are, again, you could argue what we have in the book of the rest of the book of Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, those books. And now, interestingly, we're going to get into Deuteronomy, which seems to imply that there's a lot of commandments in Deuteronomy. There's more commandments in Deuteronomy than any other book of the Bible. So we got laws there at Mount Sinai, but now Moses is going to give us more laws in the book of Deuteronomy. Interesting to think, because again, some of those laws that we're going to read in Deuteronomy were not in Exodus or Leviticus or Numbers at all. So we're going to get a lot of laws coming up in Deuteronomy. And here we go. For your own sake, therefore, be most careful, since you saw no shape when the Lord your God spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire, not to act wickedly and make for yourselves a sculptured image in any likeness, whatever, the form of a man or a woman, form of any beast on earth, the form of any winged bird that flies in the sky, the form of anything that creeps on the ground, the form of any fish that is in the waters below the earth. And when you look up at the sky and behold the sun and the moon and the stars, the whole heavenly hosts, you must not be lured into bowing down to them or serving them. These the Lord your God allotted to other peoples everywhere under heaven. But you, the Lord, took and brought you out of Egypt, that iron blast furnace, to be his very own people, as is now the case. Now notice what he called Egypt. He called it an iron blast furnace. He didn't call it the land where they had good food and the land where they were able to eat cucumbers and melons and get to love this luxurious food that they had by the Nile. No, he calls it an iron blast furnace. And this is an interesting way of, again, his perception. Remember, Moses didn't have a bad life in Egypt. Moses, at least while he was there, for a good chunk of his life, he was the prince of Egypt. He was the guy who was raised in the Pharaoh's own court. But he recognizes what Egypt really is, which is, it is a place that we went through a refinement, but a refinement that was like a purgatory. It was like a hell. that it was not a place where we'd ever want to go back to. On the contrary, this is an example of an evil place. And even though it might appear to be a luxurious and highly advanced place, it's the only thing good out of it is that we came out stronger, because again, it essentially kind of it melted away everything else. So it's a weird description of it. It's not necessarily what you'd expect. And again, one of the things, to go back to the first part of this, is that Moses tells the people, other people can worship these things. Kind of an interesting reverse of what Pat Robertson told you, Philip. We would tell Gentiles, yeah, you can worship these things, but they're not for us. We're not supposed to worship gods that have forms. We're not supposed to worship the stars in the heavens and the sun and the moon. What's interesting is, and again, some people would say this is about astrology. It doesn't necessarily say this is astrology. And we know that Jews did look at the stars as symbols of the future and of destiny, if you will. That's why we say the word mazal tov, which means good stars, good luck, good constellations, good fortune. It's not that. It's that the people actually worshiped them, and they put them and said that they were gods in the sky. And so that was something that the Jews said, we don't do that. We don't recognize the sun as a deity. We don't recognize those things. They're all part of God. They're not gods in their own right. And so don't be lured into bowing down to things that don't have power. And so what Moses is telling them is the God that you know, the God that actually came to us at Mount Sinai, the God that is so accessible to us, is not a God of any form. And it really does seem to kind of reveal a slightly different approach to God, which by Deuteronomy, it's one of, don't even think of trying to see God as in any corporal way. Don't try to do that. It lessens what God is, and we know that there's a God who doesn't have a form. So it does seem to be a little different than Exodus, which kind of relies not so much on God having a form. It doesn't say God has a form, but the sound and light show that God puts on at Mount Sinai is definitely dramatic, and it is definitely visual. And here there's kind of a step away from the visual, which is, it's about the voice. It's not about what you saw, it's about what you heard. And we don't worship things that we see. We don't really even worship things that we hear, but we're not lured by that. We understand that things that we hear are not things on their own. Things make sounds, and we know that things make sounds, but they're not in themselves they're not, the sound isn't the power. And the problem that we have is that when we see things, we do the exact opposite. We think the thing that we saw has the power. And Moses is telling people, don't do that. Don't rely on your senses to tell you that this is what you see is what we worship. What we worship, what we attach ourselves to, is much bigger than that. And it's not something that can be seen. It's something that can be felt. It's something that can be experienced, but it's much bigger because it's everything. It's not one thing. It's not one planet. It's not one star. It's everything. And think about how advanced that was for the time, because even when we first started understanding that the sun was at the center of the solar system, the emphasis was still on the sun. But then we realized the sun is just one of billions of stars out there, and to think that this star is any more unique or special is ridiculous, because God is the sum of all these things. So the more we've learned, the more we've realized that it was very narcissistic and very limiting to think that this universe or this solar system or this planet was all of God's creation. So think about that this was something that we started giving to people, at least in the book of Deuteronomy. Now it says, the Lord was angry with me on your account. And this is a theme that we have in Deuteronomy, where Moses says to the people, you keep getting me in trouble. And this is, again, a little different than what we get in Exodus, which is that Moses is standing up for the people with God all the time. And Moses, seems to be so eager and so strong in doing it. But we really get his discussion with God. We don't get his internal discussion and what he was thinking. In Deuteronomy, we do. And it seems as though it bothered him a lot more. At least the author of Deuteronomy, or again, the way we imagine that Moses would tell the story, is not the way we have it when God and Moses are in the discussion. And so here again, we have Moses saying, God was mad at me. 1 second, because I touched this thing. 1 second. So, so as he says, and swore that I should not cross the Jordan and enter the good land that the Lord your God is assigning you as a heritage. For I must die in this land. I shall not cross the Jordan, but you will cross and take possession of that good land. Take care then not to forget the covenant that the Lord your God concluded with you, and not to make for yourselves a sculptured image in any likeness against which the Lord your God has enjoined you. For the Lord your God is a consuming fire and an impassioned God. El Kana. God is an impassioned or zealous or jealous God. When you have begotten children and children's children and are long established in the land, should you act wickedly and make for yourselves a sculptured image in any likeness, causing the Lord your God displeasure and vexation? And we're, by the way, not even in the Ten Commandments yet. I call heaven and earth this day to witness against you. You shall soon perish from the land you are crossing the Jordan to possess. You shall not long endure in it, but you shall be utterly wiped out. Yep.
Yeah, just to back up, when he says not to do a sculptured image, do you think they were worried that there was a concern that the Jews would build a statue of Moses?
Well, we do know, we read about it a couple weeks ago, that there was this staff that Moses had that became, that was worshipped, that became an idol. So yeah, it could be that Moses would be worshipped, but it really does seem that Moses was more worried about God being worshipped in this way, or God being reduced to a statue. Now, I'll tell you this, we know that Moses is writing this, or the writer who's writing this is writing this for a very good reason, which is that the Jews couldn't stop making idols during this period. This creation of idols, even if they were a representation of God, of Adonai, was a continuous problem. We know about it because the Bible tells us this. And so again, this idea of what went wrong for the Jews, why did the Babylonians destroy the temple? Because they kept worshiping idols. That idolatry is what caused the destruction of the temple. And so, at least the way the rabbis interpret it, that's what happened. The book of Deuteronomy seems to also be warning against that, or was written after this had already happened, or as it was happening. And people seeing the writing on the wall saying, you know what? We're going to get destroyed for this. We know God doesn't want us to make idols, but yet we keep making idols. And the reason that we know this isn't just a story, like an imagination. Well, first of all, the Bible's, you ask yourself, why would the Bible lie about the fact that people were making idols, that these kings of Israel were making idols? Why would they lie about that? But the main reason why we know that it's not a lie or an exaggeration is because we found the idols. They're everywhere. we've excavated from this period, from the first temple period, we find idols, household idols, idols that are feminine fertility goddesses. We find them everywhere. So it's pretty clear that the Israelites were not giving up this desire to worship and to have idols. And again, the Bible, the book of Deuteronomy gets a little bit more specific here, which is that it doesn't matter whether the idol that you have is an idol of God. Don't make an idol. And so it doesn't mean, I made some bullheaded, whatever body of a whatever God. Don't make God. Don't try to make a God at all. Don't make a God of. Don't make our God. So it's really interesting that the book of Deuteronomy seems, again, it's not just here in chapter 4, but it is here right away, right in our face. Don't make idols. And it is definitely the theme of chapter 4. And again, we read about it in Exodus. When they made the golden calf, they broke it right away. They broke it within literally days of getting the law in the Ten Commandments. They went on and built a golden calf. So this isn't theoretical. It's provable. It's makes sense. It's not the way we worship gods today, or God, because there are very few religions today that have survived that are idolatrous, that have idols or statues that are worshipped. There are some. I'm not saying there are none. I'm not, but it's not our culture, and it's not the culture. It's not something that most of us. We see it when we go on vacation, but we don't. It's not in our own backyards. If you're a Jew who lived in India, it was, and there were Jews that lived in India for thousands of years, but literally thousands of years. But for most of us, this hasn't been an issue, what to do with idols. So any kind of idol, whether it was Moses or God or an animal or God's wife, you don't do it. And it says, the Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and only a few scant of you will be left among the nations. There you will serve man-made gods of wood and stone that cannot see or hear or eat or smell. But if you search there for the Lord your God, you will find him, if only you will seek him with all your heart and your soul. And this is the other phrase that we get throughout Deuteronomy. Bechol levavcha v'chol nafshecha, with all your heart. And we don't have v'chol moedecha, with all of your strength, with all of your being. We don't have that phrase, but you can see with all of your heart, with all of your soul. When you're in distress because all these things have befallen you, and in the end, return to the Lord your God and obey him. For the Lord your God is compassionate. El Rahum Adonai. God is a compassionate God. He will not fail you, or nor will he let you perish. He will not forget the covenant which he made on oath with your fathers. You have but to inquire about bygone ages that came before you, ever since God created man on earth, from one end of heaven to the other. Has anything as grand as this ever happened, or has it ever been known? Has any other people heard the voice of God speaking out of the fire as you have and survived? Or has any God ventured to go and take for himself one nation from the midst of another by prodigious acts, by signs and portents, by war, by a mighty and outstretched arm and awesome power, as the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your very eyes? It has been clearly demonstrated to you that the Lord alone is God, and there is none beside him. From the heavens, he let you hear his voice to discipline you. On earth, he let you see his great fire. And from amidst that fire, you heard his words. And because he loved your fathers, he chose their heirs after them. He himself, in his great might, led you out of Egypt. So he loved your ancestors, your patriarchs and matriarchs. And that's, Abraham and Sarah, etc. But he also took you, you're the descendants of those people, and he took you out, and your fathers and mothers, to drive from your paths nations greater and more populous than you, to take you into their land and assign it to you as a heritage, as is still the case. Know therefore this day, and keep in mind that the Lord alone is God, in heaven above and on earth below. There is none other. So again, this is a promise that God made to your ancestors. It's being fulfilled in your lifetime. You're going to be the ones who get to live this. Observe his laws and commandments, which I join upon you this day. Again, Hayom, that it may go well with you and your children after you. Again, your children, that you may long remain in the land that the Lord your God is assigning to you for all time. Then Moses set aside these 3 cities on the east of the Jordan, to which a manslayer could escape. These are the cities of refuge, which you read about again in Numbers. So it kind of skipped ahead again to Numbers. One who unwittingly slew a fellow man without having been hostile to him in the past, he could flee to one of these cities and live. Bezer in the wilderness of the tableland belonging to the Reubenites. Remote in Gilad belonging to the Gadites, and Golan and Bashan belonging to the Manassites. This is the teaching that Moses set before the Israelites. These are the decrees, the laws, and rules that Moses addressed to the people of Israel after they left the land of Egypt. Beyond the Jordan, in the valley of Beth Peor, in the land of King Sihon of the Amorites, who dwelled in Heshbon, whom Moses and the Israelites defeated after they left Egypt. And again, it takes us back just a couple chapters in Numbers, for they had taken possession of that country. All right? And again, that is the land on the other side of the Jordan River where they're in right now. So he's saying these are the laws, and here they are. I mean, it seems like we got some of the laws already, especially kind of this long law about not making idols, cautioning against that. But here's the thing. This is now, as we get into this, hold it one second. I was going to see if we missed anything. Nope. We're going to get into chapter 5. So now, as we get into chapter 5, let us take a look. So, let's take a look at what happens here in chapter 5. This is the recitation of the 10 Commandments. So here in this last half of the class tonight, we're going to take a look at this. And let me just get Marina in here. Hey, Marina. You got here just in time for the recitation of the 10 Commandments the second time. First time in Exodus, and now they're here for us in Deuteronomy. Moses summoned all the Israelites and said to them, "Hear, O Israel, the laws and rules that I proclaim to you this day. Study them and observe them faithfully. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb." And again, the word brit, Bechorev, a covenant is a legal agreement. It's the same word that we use, covenant is the same word that we use for a legal contract. So this was seen as a legal contract. And what's important about this is that there are many versions of these kind of brit covenant texts that we have in the ancient Near East that we found. And they're usually between a king and a god, or a king and his people. What's interesting about our biblical version is that it's between God and every human being, all the Israelites. There's not a king, this is not a between two parties of equal rank. This is between God, the master of the universe, and humanity. And there's something so powerful about that idea that the agreement, that the brit is a covenant between ourselves and God. And so this idea is that if we fulfill our side of the bargain, then God will do God's side. And what's the interesting thing about God's side of this, what's God's part of the bargain, is keeping us in our land. It's not, having us all be free of disease. It's not all of us having, wealth. And I mean, there's a land flowing of milk and honey. We get a good product here. We're given something that's worth something, but it's not, you're guaranteed to be wealthy. You still have to work. But there's something really special here, which is that what is it that Deuteronomy is telling us is the trade-off for doing the right thing. There is an agreement, there's a brit and the covenant. And again, this is what makes Deuteronomy different, is that there is this understanding that the agreement between the parties is what is the covenant, is what is the basis for who we are as a people. That's why it seems like it's developed a little bit. This isn't just, here's our story, here's why we have to keep it, the laws, you learn from the story. It's now getting to the point of saying, okay, here's the agreement, here are the terms, just follow the terms of the agreement. And if you do your part, you'll get to live on the land. You'll be a people that is secure as a people throughout history. And that is essentially what we're striving for. That's what our theology is here. When people say, well, why do bad things happen to good people, and what's the meaning of life? Deuteronomy does something a little different here. And this is why, again, some people say it's a whole different theology from earlier in the Bible and from later in the Bible. There seems to be this understanding is that it's about collective responsibility, that if we follow the rules as a group, we'll be rewarded as a group. And it seems to take that into consideration, not so much, again, well, I did a good thing, and so God should reward me with the good thing back. Or, why isn't God giving me, my just reward? Because Deuteronomy is not really concerned with that. Deuteronomy is concerned with what's happening to the people as a whole, not what's happening to one person. So, some people don't like that. I mean, I'm not arguing in favor of that or not in favor of it, but it's been pointed out that it's a different kind of theology. It's a different type of approach to God and to why things happen the way they happen, and to what do we believe. And there is a strain of Judaism that goes back to Deuteronomy, which says we don't look at our individual reward and punishment. We look at ourselves as a group, as a collective. And again, keep that in mind as we go through the whole book of Deuteronomy. That's an underlying implication to the whole book. It's not with our fathers that the Lord made this covenant, but with us, the living, every one of us who are here today. Hayom, po hayom, that are here today. All of us who are alive. And that's what it is, the living. Kulanu Chaim, all of us who are alive. The covenant was not with people who are dead. It's with you, the living people. Face to face, the Lord spoke to you on the mountain of the fire. I stood between the Lord and you at that time. And again, these are really not them. It's the kids. But he's still saying you, and he's dropping back and forth with this understanding that the covenant is with you. It was not with those people that were at Mount Sinai. I stood between the Lord and you at that time to convey the Lord's word to you. For you were afraid of the fire and did not go up in the mountain, saying, I, the Lord, am your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. And that is the way the Ten Commandments are introduced, as part of the story, in a way that it seems like more development than we have earlier on in Exodus. And it goes into this, I stood before the Lord your God, and these are the words in Mount Sinai. I, Lord, brought you out. And again, that's the same way it begins. Anochi Adonai Elohecha. And then it says, you shall have no other gods besides me. Which again, could be the first commandment by itself. Don't have any other gods. The commandment against polytheism. Then the next commandment being, You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image of any likeness of what is in the heavens above or on earth below or in the waters below the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am an impassioned God. And again, that same word, El Kana. I'm a passionate God, a jealous God, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children, upon the third and fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments.
Rabbi,
Yes.
this is very meaningful to me because although I didn't descend from Jewish people, when I think about being with everybody who made this covenant with God at Horeb, it gives me chills and it really resonates.
Yeah. And that it is why we when we bring somebody into the covenant of Israel, like you went through, and I was honored to be there when you were officially part of the covenant, what happens in that moment is that we say you took your place at Mount Sinai. We're standing with you at that moment at Mount Sinai. You take your place. It's as if you then materialized at Mount Sinai in that moment to be there at Mount Sinai.
Yes, and that's why the conversion and the B'nai Mitzvah was not a big deal to me. It was just acknowledging something like a punctuation.
Well, it's a pretty big punctuation, because so again, me, other people who are on this Zoom room right now, the implication here is that we were at Mount Sinai because our ancestors were Jewish, and because it says that every person born and unborn who is a Jew who is at Mount Sinai. Well, here's the thing. There's an implication that the rabbis picked up on from that, which is that every Jew was there at Mount Sinai, and we got to see the Sound and Light show, and we got to be scared. But anybody who decided to stand there at Mount Sinai and take their place and stand there at that moment as an adult, without being born into it, did something amazing, because they did it willingly, and they did it without feeling that power of it, that sound and light. They didn't need to be impressed. And more importantly, they had a choice. Now, today, because we know that assimilation and the fact that most people in the Jewish community really haven't really given the thought of what it means to be a Jew enough thought. Some people say that every Jew today is kind of like a Jew by choice. But in reality, that means that whenever anybody makes that decision to stand at Sinai, then maybe there are Jews today who take that moment and kind of appear at Mount Sinai and are there for that covenant, that have now suddenly again materialized at Mount Sinai and are taking that upon them, because otherwise there's just like an empty seat for them. They're not there. And that's kind of an amazing image. And the rabbis go on in that midrash, that explanation, to say there are none more dear to God. Ein chaviv l'Adonai. There are none that is dear to God as the convert, because the convert did it because of their own inner voice, their own inner desire to do it, not because they had no choice in it, because they were born into it, but because they decided that they wanted to stand there in that moment. And that is I'll never forget when I was a kid, I read that midrash and I was blown away. I actually, in that moment, envied a convert, because I said to myself, Judaism's actually teaching us that people who've made that decision have done something so special, so holy. And that's one of the reasons why for the rest of my life, I decided whether or not I became a rabbi, I wanted to make sure that I helped facilitate people and celebrate people who made that decision, and to never let that be something that we take for granted in our tradition, because I derive so much strength from it, and I hope everybody else does, because it's a constant inspiration for us to see people who say, I'm materializing and I'm going to appear at Mount Sinai, and I'm going to make the Jewish people stronger out of my own free will. So I will say that you can make the argument that any Jew who does that and willingly takes their place at Mount Sinai is doing something that's very dear to God, because there isn't that, well, I'm here because he brought me there. There isn't that so much anymore, where people just go, hey, he brought me there. And again, we have to try to impress this on people that you are anybody who's with us right now, who's studying Torah tonight and reading this Torah portion that takes us back to this place, is standing at Mount Sinai again. There's a wonderful book called Standing Again at Sinai by Judith Plaskow, it's actually a book on Jewish feminism, but it's a wonderful kind of exposition in, again, Standing Again at Sinai, on what does it mean to actually make a decision to, as an adult, say, I'm taking my place amongst my people. And again, we do it at bar mitzvah, but how many 13-year-olds, especially today, are responsible enough to even think about what that means? It's ridiculous. It really is. I mean, how many 30-year-olds are responsible enough to make that decision today, to say that they're willing to take this step and for it to mean something? So, wow, it's to be at Sinai right now, every day. When? Today. Hayom. When are you at Mount Sinai? Right now. Right now, you're at Mount Sinai. So again, the famous line, I visit guilt upon the descendants into the third or fourth generation. People have always been troubled by that. Of course, they forget the second part of it, which is, but I show kindness to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. Well, guess what? You're all still in the 1,000 generations from your ancestors. If they were at Mount Sinai, you're still in the 1,000th generation within that 1,000 generations since they were at Mount Sinai. So you get a benefit of being protected and loved because of the merit of those who came before you. Just remember that. Next commandment, it gets into, you shall not swear falsely by the name of the Lord. Again, the third commandment, if you will, which is not to take God's name in vain, or more specifically, not to swear by God's name, not to make a promise in God's name. And then the fourth commandment, observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. And it says, Sheshet Yamim, in 6 days you shall labor and do your work. But on the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, your son, your daughter, your male or female slave, your ox or your ass, or any of your cattle, or the stranger in your settlements, so that your male and female slave may rest as you do, that your servants get the day off too. Interesting, of course, that they're commanded to let their servants have a day off. But again, this was one of the things that made Jewish tradition different than all the other traditions that also had slavery, was that slaves were actually treated with the dignity of having a day off. Look, there's another issue here, which is that in verse 12, when it says Shamor et Yom HaShabbat, we talk about this whenever we get to Deuteronomy chapter 5. There is a difference in the way the Ten Commandments are given here and given in Exodus. In Exodus, it says Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, remember Shabbat. Observe here, guard or observe, protect. Shamor is the verb for protect, and Zachor is to remember, like in Yizkor, to remember. So because it's given two different ways, Shamor v'Zachor, we say in Lachadodi, as the poet, Rabbi Shlomo Halevi, Alkabetz, put in the words of the Lachadodi so beautifully, Shamor v'Zachor bedibur echad, guard and remember in one word. That God spoke the word Shamor and v'Zachor were heard at the same time. Why? Because the rabbis recognized that there was a problem here, that there's a difference in the verb. But the rabbis kind of brought it together by saying that the word was bifurcated at the time. And that again, you could hear the word Shamor or you could hear the word Zachor, but both words were there. And we talk about what does it mean to both guard and to remember. To remember is definitely connotes different actions. It implies and leads to different actions, and guarding leads to different actions. and again, we call somebody who is a guarder or protector of Shabbos, we call them Shomer Shabbos, which usually kind of implies that they're protecting or guarding or not doing things. But people have pointed out that Zachor, to remember Shabbat, is very important. It's not just about protecting and guarding and not doing things, but to actually remember why we're keeping Shabbat and what this day represents, which is God's gift to us of a day of rest, and that this is a gift for us. This is something that we're supposed to enjoy. So we guard and protect it so that we can enjoy it, and so we can celebrate and be in it and live in it, not for the only reason to guard it and to obsess on what we're not breaking on Shabbos. That it really is about enjoying it and protecting it because we want to protect it. And anybody who I think eventually takes on Shabbat observances in a serious way, like I did in my life, I didn't always observe Shabbat like I do today. And when I did it, it became so important for me to say, no, we're not doing those things on Shabbat, because I knew that it would encroach on how beautiful and how special the day became for us, especially when we had children, especially when we started doing things with our community that I knew if I said, well, we'll do that too, that I'd be thinking about those things too. I'm like everybody else. If I went to a baseball game or a football game on Shabbos, I'd think about it. If I went to a movie or went shopping, I'd think about those things on Shabbos. I don't have to. I don't want to. But we have to do both. We can't just guard it for the sake of protecting it and not enjoying it. You're protecting it so that you can enjoy it. Otherwise, it becomes like a treasure that you never see. You lock it away in a safe and you never get to enjoy it. And that's not what Shabbat is. So Shabbat is really a great treasure, but only when we enjoy it, only when we spend it. So, and here what's interesting is that when we read about the seventh day, it's connected directly back to Egypt. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God freed you from there with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. It is connected to your freedom, and again, by law, the freedom of those who are in your responsibility, even your slaves. And here we get to the next commandment, which again is, as we read it in the book of Exodus, again, honor your father and mother, as the Lord your God has commanded you, that you may long endure and that you may fare well in the land that the Lord your God is assigning you. It's the only one of the commandments that includes that reward in the commandment itself. Not exactly an explanation for why we should do it, which is in the last commandment, but why you should for the sake of what it brings you, which is living in the land for the long time. And then we get to these commandments that are listed in one verse. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. So those next four commandments are given together. And then we get to the last commandment. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not crave your neighbor's house or his field or his male or female slave or his ox or his ass or anything that is your neighbor's. So that is the repetition of the 10 commandments. Now, here in the book of Deuteronomy, it says right here, the Lord spoke those words, those and no more, to your whole congregation at the mountain with a mighty voice out of the fire and the dense clouds. He inscribed them on 2 tablets of stone, which he gave to me. So it doesn't say this is the end of the commandments. It says this is the end of the words that I spoke to everybody. Everybody heard it. You heard it. When you heard the voice out of the darkness while the mountain was ablaze with fire, you came up to me, all your tribal heads and elders, and said, the Lord our God has just shown us his majestic presence. His kavodo, the word kavod, his kavod, is not as COVID, his kavod, which is very close, by the way, and his greatness, right? His majestic, his majesty. And we heard his voice out of the fire. We have seen this day that man may live through God, though God has spoken to him. Let us not die then, for this fearsome fire will consume us if we hear the voice of God any longer. We will die. So here's an interesting idea, which is that the people heard it, They feel good that they heard it, but they're saying, maybe that's all we can hear. Let's not hear anything more, which seems to imply that maybe they would have heard more commandments, but they didn't want to hear any more commandments. That was enough for them. For what mortal ever heard the voice of the living God speak out of the fire, as we did and lived? You shall go closer and hear all that the Lord our God says. And then you shall tell us everything that the Lord our God tells you, and we will willingly do it. So you be our intermediary. The Lord heard that plea that you made to me, and the Lord said to me, I've heard the plea that the people have made to you. They did speak well of us. May they always be of such mind to revere me and follow all my commandments, that it may go well with them and with their children forever. Go say to them, return to your tents. But you remain here with me, and I will give you the whole instruction, the laws and the rules that you shall impart to them, for them to observe in the land that I am giving them to possess. Be careful then to do as the Lord your God has commanded you. Do not turn aside to the right or to the left. Follow only the path that the Lord your God has enjoined upon you, so that you may thrive and that it may go well with you, and that you may long endure in the land that you are to possess. So that is the way the Ten Commandments are given, with a beautiful instruction, which is do what's right, it will go well for you, and that you can endure in the land that you are to possess. Not again that each of you will have a long life, not that you will never have suffering, not that you will never lose somebody very dear to you, but that you and your people will live in the land for a long time. This covenant is based on this kind of idea that what's the reason, what's the trade-off, what do I get, what's the quid pro quo, as we say? It's that you get to live in the land. That's your land when you follow the rules. Now, we're going to get into the Shema. So let's take a look at the Shema. So, after we get the Ten Commandments, the implication again, or the continuation, is that this Torah, these laws, this instruction, these rules, that the Lord your God has commanded me to impart to you, to be observed in the land that you are about to cross in and occupy, so that you, your children, and your children's children may revere the Lord your God and follow as long as you live all his laws and commandments that I enjoin upon you, to the end that you may long endure. Obey Israel, again, based on the word beshamata, shema, to hear, willingly and faithfully, that it may go well with you, that you may increase greatly in the land flowing with milk and honey. And again, this is the words that we have. Eretz zavat chalav u'dvash, a land flowing with milk and honey. And here we have the words right after that. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone, the Lord is one. So here they translated the word Echad as alone, or instead of one. But again, this idea that there's only one God, it's your God. And the line by itself, of course, is powerful. It's the 6 words that we say, and again, traditionally, as Marina recounted going through conversion, it's the words that we have the person say when they go through a conversion. It's the words that we say when we lie down at night, when we rise up in the morning. But it's not the one line. It's not the one verse, right? It's not just the words of Shema. That's the part that we can maybe know by heart, the mantra, if you will. But it really is, again, this idea too, that you shall love the Lord your God, love with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Take to heart these instructions which I charge you this day. Impress them upon your children. Recite them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And so those lines that became part of our homes and the way we put on tefillin traditionally, the phylacteries, the containers that contain these words that we put on our between our eyes and on our arms to fulfill that mitzvah, to actually literally put those on us, because again, is it meant to be symbolic? Our ancestors, or at least again, some of our ancestors, the rabbinic ancestors, said, no, we literally put them on. We're going to put them on, and we're going to put them on our gates, on our homes. We're going to put a Shema inside those and on those ways. Again, was it meant to be that way? Look, folks, I'm going to tell you something which you maybe heard me say before, but since we're reading in the Torah, I'll share it with you now. When it says, take to heart these instructions which I charge you this day, the Shema, the way we've understood it, is that it's the Shema and Ve'ahavta itself. So put those words. But it seems to be the context of what we just read that what actually might have been put on the doorposts or on the gates, or maybe even in amulets, were the Ten Commandments themselves. The instruction that we just read about in the previous chapter, the Ten Commandments. So maybe the Ten Commandments were what were inscribed. Makes sense. What are you going to keep? The words that tell you to keep the Ten Commandments, or the Ten Commandments themselves? The covenant. These are the words that we have to keep in order for us to be okay. They're not all the covenant, they're not all the rules, but they are the terms, or if you will, the Bill of Rights, or the main legal text that we're basing this off of. So maybe it was that which we were supposed to listen to or hear. Maybe that's what we were supposed to write. Because it seems as though it's not the words that, the Shema and Ve'ahavta by themselves, but that in an interesting way, the Shema and Ve'ahavta then became representative of all those words, the Ten Commandments and all of the 613 commandments. Those are what we take on every day. So those are the words. I mean, the 6:4 through 6:9 is Shema and Ve'ahavta. It continues, and we'll finish up with this chapter. We'll go into actually chapter 7, a little bit of chapter 7. But when the Lord your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to assign to you great and flourishing cities that you did not build. You didn't build them. You inherited them. Houses full of good things that you did not fill. Hewn cisterns that you did not hew. Vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. And you eat your fill. Take heed that you do not forget that the Lord who freed you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. You get these things. You get a pre-built country because of God and because you're keeping the law. The people that you're about to knock out didn't follow rules. And so you get to have this land. I promised it to your ancestors, but the Bible tells us essentially that we didn't get this land until we were ready for it and until the people who were living there no longer deserved it. And of course, by implication is if you don't deserve it, you'll get kicked out. Now, of course, everybody who reads this now is left with one thing in their minds, which is, but what happened when Israel established itself as a modern country? What did Israel find? What did the Jewish people find in the land of Israel when they came there? And they came there again a little over 100 years ago at the turn of the beginning of the 20th century, the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, they found virtually nothing. And again, people say, yes, but there were people already living there. There were, and there were people of all backgrounds that were living there: Jews, Christians, Muslims, Turks, Circassians, Bedouin. There were a lot of people living there, but actually not as many people as you'd think. It was a pretty uninhabited land, and it was a pretty badly maintained land by every record that we have, by the English archaeologists who traveled through there, by the French and German surveyors and pilgrimage people who came there and were so disappointed when they came to the land of Israel and found that it was a wasteland, that there was no land of milk and honey, that 2,000 years of overgrazing of goats and sheep eating up everything anytime that there was a green land, was that for hundreds of years there was such deforestation and such waste. And again, people are going to say, yes, but there were Arab villages there that were depopulated. I'm going to tell you, there were some. It's not that there was not areas that there were people, but I'm telling you, for the most part, the land was not a land flowing with milk and honey, and everybody knows that. And so Israel really did have to get rebuilt out of nothing. That is the truth. Again, was there people who were moved out of their properties forcibly, or again, mostly through their own conviction of not wanting to be there anymore and not wanting to live with Jews next door to Jews? Then that's the truth. That's what really happened. But the population was very small in the turn of the 20th century. And many Arabs moved to the area once Jews started coming there, because there was business. Because once Jews started building up cities, then there was work to be had. So the idea that Arabs all left because of that is not true. They came to some areas where there hadn't been cities before, and they moved into areas next to Jews or nearby Jews because there were now jobs. Because there were Jews from Russia and Poland that were making pilgrimage and living now and making Aliyah in these first waves of Aliyah. So this is all part of the truth. And as we read this, we can't help but think about it. We can't help but kind of take ourselves back to 100 years ago, and what was it like for the generation of Jews who settled the land 100 years ago, 75 years ago? What was the land like? And it was a disaster area. And anybody who argues about that is just, they're flat out wrong. They literally are living in a delusion of what really happened. It's not the truth. The idea that somehow Jews came in and kicked out a bunch of people and inhabited cities isn't the case. It was the case 3,000 years earlier, when the Jews came in under Moses and Joshua. And then again, Joshua finishing this up. According to that, there were olive groves, and there were vineyards, and there was figs, and there were all these wonderful crops and grains that were growing there, but not in 1920. It was not a great place to live. And Israel was built by people who dreamt of bringing the land back to life, not this. So it upsets me, obviously, when people don't tell that story. I mean, it's just, there were a lot of Jews that died of malaria trying to drain swamps so that they could kind of bring back areas that thousands of years ago had been lush and verdant areas, but had been completely deforested and not maintained. The Turks didn't care. The British didn't care. The Romans took better care of the land of Israel than any of these people did. So, revere only the Lord your God and worship him alone, and swear only by his name. And again, these are kind of different ways of retelling the Ten Commandments. Do not follow other gods or any of the gods of people about you, for the Lord your God is in your midst, is an impassioned God. Lest the anger of the Lord your God blaze forth against you, and he wipe you off the face of the earth. Do not try the Lord your God as you did at Massah, back in the wilderness, when you were moaning and complaining against God. Be sure to keep the commandments, decrees, and laws that the Lord your God has enjoined upon you. Do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may go well with you, and that you may be able to possess the good land that the Lord your God promised as an oath to your fathers. Yeah. Phil is, yes, I'm talking about Seth Rogen today, who was trying
actually, that was me asking the question.
Yes, he was trying to be, he was trying to be provocative, and it's disappointing. And he just kept stepping over himself, and then basically admitting that his wife, I
know.
When you smoke that much marijuana, you there is a cost to it, and he rambles on and, didn't make sense. We're talking about Mark Maron's show where where Mark Maron and him decided to wax on, philosophically on Judaism, and it was provocative, but it wasn't really sense. I mean, I would be fine if there was some semblance of sense and order to their points, but there really wasn't. I'm not joking. I mean, it was just, I didn't hear it. I read the transcript of it. So in all fairness, I didn't need to. And I like Seth Rogen. I mean, don't get me wrong. We Seth Rogen does funny things. I'm looking forward to seeing An American Pickle. I'm still going to see it, but I don't think that, I'm hoping that the movie doesn't give us I'm sure it's going to make fun of things and make us feel uncomfortable, but hopefully there'll be a good message to it too. It looks like there'll be a good message for it. I don't, who knows? I saw a trailer which was way too long, which is not a good sign, by the way. Usually when there's a trailer that's long, the movie that is coming behind it is not so good, but I'm hoping I'm wrong. Anyways, we'll discuss it next week when it's coming out Thursday, a week from Thursday. So we won't be able to discuss it next Wednesday, but the week after, on HBO Max. Another one of those things I can't figure out, Kelly, whether I need to have it or not, but whatever. I have HBO. I just don't know if I need HBO Max, but it's a discussion, as we said, for another time, of overload, which I also was talking to Philip. I mean, how many prescriptions do I need? Please give me a break already. It's really ticking me off now, as I canceled the MLB network, and now I kind of want it back again. But anyways, here we go. He says, and we're going to finish up with these last few lines, or not few lines, but the last part of this chapter. When in time your children ask you, what mean the decrees, the laws, and the rules which the Lord has enjoined upon you? Again, it sounds a little bit like the four children, right? What do these laws mean to you, right? You shall say to your children, we were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord freed us from Egypt with a mighty hand. The Lord wrought before our eyes marvelous and destructive signs and portents in Egypt against Pharaoh and all his household. And us he freed from there, that he might take us and give us this land that he had promised on oath to our fathers. And the Lord commanded us to observe all these laws, to revere the Lord our God for our lasting good and for our survival, as is now the case. It will therefore be to our merit before the Lord our God to observe faithfully this whole instruction as he has commanded us. And so this is this idea again that things will go well for us, and they'll go well, and we'll be able to have the next generation. We'll be able to tell them, yeah, you know what? This is why we do these things, because, it keeps us alive. These laws are laws of life. And we got this land. It was promised to our ancestors. But that's not enough. We have to do something. And not only that, there's an example if we don't. And here's what it tells us in the last few lines that we're going to read tonight from chapter 7. When the Lord your God brings you to the land that you are about to enter and possess, and he dislodges many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations much larger than you. These are the Canaanite peoples, the people who live in the land already. These are the indigenous peoples, as we would say today. These are the inhabitants of the land, who, by the way, according to the Bible, were not promised this land. The land was promised to our ancestors, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But interestingly, they were not the inhabitants of the land. These people were. Why were they able to inhabit the land? Well, the Bible seems to be saying, the Lord your God delivers them and you defeat them. You must doom them to destruction. Grant them no turns and give them no quarter. You shall not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons. For they will turn your children away from me to worship other gods. And the Lord's anger will blaze forth against you and he will promptly wipe you out. Instead, this is what you are due to them. You shall tear down their altars, smash their pillars, cut down their sacred posts, and consign their images to fire. For you are a people consecrated to the Lord your God. Of all the peoples on earth, the Lord your God chose you to be his treasured people. So when you come into that land, you don't assimilate amongst those people. You destroy every vestige of their culture. Because again, they are people who will lead you down the wrong path. And what's interesting about this is that it's because they've already proven it. It's not you wipe them out because they're people who are the people who already live there. And God, because God says to the Israelites here, it's not because you're the most numerous of people that the Lord has set his heart upon you and chose you. Indeed, you're the smallest of peoples. But it was because the Lord favored you and kept the oath he made to your ancestors. The Lord freed you with a mighty hand and rescued you out of Egypt, out of the power of Pharaoh. Know, therefore, that only the Lord your God is God, the steadfast God who keeps his covenant faithfully to the 1,000th generation of those who love and keep his commandment, but who instantly requites with destruction those who reject him. Never slow with those who reject him, but requiting them instantly. Therefore, observe this instruction, the laws and the rules with which I charge you this day. Now, I'm going to tell you something. Deuteronomy also goes on to tell us that the Canaanites, they deserved what happened to them because, again, they were doing these horrible things, and they are going to make you do horrible things. Now, I will tell you something else. For those of you who are upset or troubled by this seemingly genocidal commandment against the Canaanites who already are living there, understand this. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. We know it didn't happen. We know from archaeology and we know from the Bible itself that it didn't happen. They never wiped out the Canaanites. Did they go to war against Canaanites? Sure. The book of Joshua tells us about the conquests and the land that they conquered, the cities that they did conquer from the Canaanites, places like Jericho that we know so famously, the battle against Jericho. But they didn't wipe out the Canaanites. We know that because the Canaanites are still living there later on, hundreds of years later, and they're continuously drawing the Israelites into idolatry, or at least that's one way of looking at it, is that these people continuously, through their indigenous worship, are making us worship like they are. We're going, hey, look, let's worship like the Canaanites. How do we know it? Because it's in the book of Kings. It's in Samuel. It's in Joshua. It's in Judges. All of the books that we read about of the history of the Jews is filled with us worshiping Canaanite gods. Those idols that we were making were Canaanite gods. The same idol. We can't tell them apart from Canaanites. So here's the interesting thing. Why would we say that we should have done this? Because we didn't do it. And the interesting thing is that Deuteronomy seems to be telling us that we are now dealing with the problem of not getting rid of this culture because we've now sunk back down into it. We couldn't escape it. And now, folks, I have to tell you something. As we wind up and as we're done, I am so thirsty that I can't even talk. I had my last drink about a half hour ago, 30 minutes ago, and that is the last drink that I'll have for the next 25 hours. I now know why it's not a good idea to talk so much on Tisha B'Av. We finished up just in time. And now I always tell people it's a good warm up for it's a trial for Yom Kippur. It's like that pre-marathon run where you learn that you can do it, but it is usually much hotter in July and August for Tisha B'Av. So I'm already starting. I'm already starting from a bad place. I did love studying with you tonight, and it did give us a way to bring in Tisha B'Av with a reminder. I want to finish with this important message again from Torah. According to the rabbis, the first temple, the Temple of Solomon, the temple that the Babylonians destroyed in 586, so about 2,600 years ago. The rabbis taught us in the Talmud, so again, after the second temple was destroyed, when they had the perspective of history, they said the first temple was destroyed because of idolatry, because we couldn't give it up. Couldn't give it up. For whatever reason, like today, we think about it, why couldn't these people give up idolatry? Why couldn't they? Just couldn't do it. We could, you and I could, but they couldn't. The rabbis thought it was already kind of silly by then, and they even lived amongst Romans. They had beautiful statues of gods, but by then I think even Romans were starting to think, you know what, maybe this idolatry stuff is kind of silly. But the rabbi said the second temple was not destroyed because of idolatry. We weren't sacrificing to idols anymore. We weren't worshiping idols. We weren't Greco-Roman in that way. We might have been Greco-Roman in the languages we spoke and the books we read and those kind of things, but the rabbis didn't fault us on that. They didn't say that's why the temple was destroyed the second time. When the Romans destroyed the temple, and this gets back to what we talked about at the beginning, why did the temple have to be destroyed? The rabbis taught that the second temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, because of baseless hatred amongst Jews. That Jews had fought amongst themselves and gotten to a point of hatred within the group that the temple couldn't stand anymore. And they were getting to a very important historical issue, which is that the Romans didn't destroy us. We destroyed ourselves. The Romans stood by and were only too happy to pick up the damage, the destruction. But we were setting those fires ourselves. When Jerusalem burned, some of those fires that were the worst fires were set by other Jews who were attacking other Jews who they felt were not fighting the Romans as hard as they should have. That's the truth. And so it's a great cautionary tale for us. We don't have to worry about idolatry. We have to worry about infighting amongst our own group. And it's been a challenge for thousands of years. The irony, of course, is that whenever we have a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of stuff on the outside, we tend to become closer and we stop fighting amongst ourselves. The internal bickering stops. And so the internal bickering hasn't been as strong. Thankfully, during COVID, we've had more and more people coming together. And even in Israel, the political level until recently was kind of united. It's starting to fracture a little bit in Israel, as you've seen in the last few days. There have been protests out in front of Netanyahu's house, and there's a little bit of fraying at the edges. But I will tell you, the cautionary tale from the Talmud is, don't let us destroy ourselves. And again, maybe it's not at the forefront of our thought today, but it's always in the back of our minds that it's not, our biggest threat is not our lack of belief in God, if you will, but it is, and maybe, you know what, maybe the argument is that we're more likely to believe in idols than we are to fight amongst other Jews. I mean, I don't know. We have our own idols today, maybe that are our problem, but that's the cautionary tale that the rabbis wanted to give us, that it's not just about belief. It's about the way we treat each other. And if we can't treat each other, we're not going to have control over our own fate. And that's what Jerusalem represents. Jerusalem doesn't just represent a holy place. I mean, it is the holy place, but it represents control of our own fate. It's basically saying, you know what? We understand that we can control our destiny by our actions. And that's all we can really hope for as Jews, is to be able to be in control of who we are, and not to be afraid. So again, on this Tisha B'Av, don't fast if you're fragile, and if you're at all worried about your health and your exposure to other people. If you're going out at all, I would say don't fast, because it's you're exposing yourself to more problems, and tonight and through tomorrow, we really do think about what we lost, and I encourage you, if you haven't read some of the stories from Lamentations, or if you haven't read the testaments of the Jews during the time of the Romans, the story of Masada, or the story of Rabbi Yochanan fleeing from Jerusalem. Read some of those stories too, about what happened as Jerusalem was falling. The Jewish side, and you can even read the Roman side. It's pretty powerful to read the Roman side of the story too. When they're recognizing that, again, things are going on here that are far bigger than what they imagined. And people ask me, if I could live any period of time, it would be that time. It would be 2,000 years ago in Jerusalem, because arguably the time that the world was set into motion in the way that it was. There'd be no Christianity. Rabbinic Judaism would not be what it is. And so as a Jew, and as somebody who lived in the Western world, those two things happened during the time of the destruction of the temple. So again, this is a time of reflection and of thinking about loss, and hoping and praying that it'll never happen again. I've had two very powerful places I've been in for Tisha B'Av, because it's a time of summer and you can travel. I've been in Jerusalem for Tisha B'Av. It's one of the only holidays that I've actually been in Jerusalem. It's very powerful to be at the wall. It gives me the chills actually thinking about being at the wall at Tisha B'Av. People pray there all day. There are some people who literally go to the wall and they do not leave for 25 hours. I don't know what's going to happen this year. It'll be interesting to see what happens this year at the Kotel. The other place that I was at Tisha B'Av, which was very powerful, was Germany. And I was there for Tisha B'Av one year, and at the synagogue in Frankfurt, one of the few synagogues that survived. And that was a pretty powerful place to hear the words of Lamentations being read out in the place of where the Holocaust emanated out of. So those are some of the places that I've been for Tisha B'Av that are memorable. So anyways, I'm going to post up on our Facebook page. I'm going to post up a link to our to a book that has some readings for Tisha B'Av and some of the traditions, holiday book that I have, and also email it out to everybody right now, so you can have a little bit to read on Tisha B'Av. So can't really say have a good evening, but have a meaningful evening, have a meaningful day ahead. And again, please, in the midst of everything else, stay safe and stay healthy, and stay positive, and know that there are better days ahead. So take care, everyone. Take care all.
Right.
You will.